I'm so happy that there weren't just 3 people here this morning. On a Saturday morning for an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. I'm really pleased that you came. This kind of wraps up our work that we started this year. At the very beginning of the year, we brought Chris in. He spent some time with our administrators and then did a parent program the night before convocation. And we had Chris speak at convocation. And really the feedback we got about his message and his strategies and his approach, and he kind of really matched the Mount Lebanon persona and ethos of kind of the kids we deal with. And he'll tell you a little bit about his story again to remind you about him. But I just want to remind you how it all started. I happened to come across the book Growing Up Mindful, and I was reading it, and I thought, oh, this would be kind of neat. I wonder if I send him an email out of the blue, will he answer it, or will our publicist answer it? But sure enough, a couple seconds after I sent it, I said, Chris, would you ever be interested in coming? He said, yes. And that was at the beginning of the year. And then so at the end of the year, I was thinking more about it again, and one of the comments he makes in this book about enlightened communities, he has a chapter called Enlightened Communities, Creating a Culture of Mindfulness in Your Community. One of the sentences that I underlined a long time ago was to advocate that everyone in the community get some exposure to mindfulness, whether from a one-time talk or an ongoing group. Consider every stakeholder, the kids, the community, your faculty and staff. And so I've kind of used that as my beacon, as my light to get through this year, and that's how I wanted to end. The year can become very stressful, and a lot of things happen at the end of the year, but Chris has really, his book has guided some of my thinking, and he was telling us about this last year. He wrote the most charming children's book. It's called Alphabets, and this is my plug for Chris. Every letter of the alphabet, A is alligator breath, B is a butterfly, and he's demonstrating over there. Not often do you have that, and it's so cute. It goes all the way through the alphabet, and we do have a few of these for sale back there, but you can get them on Amazon. And Chris would certainly, we have a few of these left if anybody wants these, and we have a couple of these in the back. So after he's going to spend about an hour with you, do whatever he's going to do. I trust him completely. And then this afternoon, we hope we get just as many parents and community members to come too, because really if one person hears one thing and it has a positive impact on their life, I think we've done something really good. So that's what we aim to do here. Last night, I tried a little experiment. We had him have pizza with 8 of our juniors who are going to be class officers. And we just sat around and talked informally for about an hour, and really a lovely conversation. We want to talk about, you guys have produced some really great kids. By the time they get to 11th grade, they were talking about stress and how that impacts their bodies, and what are some of the strategies we can use to deal with that stress. It was really a lovely conversation, and I was really happy about that. So if he's half as good as he was last night, he will be great. So let me introduce Dr. Chris Willard.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tim, for having me back.
Oh, there we go. Thanks so much, Tim, for having me back. And it really is great to be back. I was talking to my wife last night, and I was saying, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm supposed to go and talk to the kids tonight, and then tomorrow it's like this absolutely beautiful day, and graduation just happened, and I'm sure there'll be about 3 people that show up, because what teachers are going to want to spend a Saturday morning listening to me when they could be outside, especially when summer is beginning and it's finals time and all that. So I'm truly just so impressed with the work that everyone here in Mount Lebanon is doing, and that people are here to show up to do some more learning on a Saturday morning. This does not happen everywhere I go, so this really is a special place that everyone here has worked on to create. So I'm really happy to be back. I know people saw me last August, I think I was last here. I think I did about 15 minutes or so at convocation, so I'll try not to repeat a lot of what I did then, but to really give you some new ideas for practices that you can use yourself, as well as that you can share with the kids with whom you're working. So with that, I actually thought I would just start with a really short, simple, sweet practice just to get us settled. I was a teacher for a couple of years. Remember, like, everyone was so big on acronyms, so I made up my own mindfulness acronym, which is taking a mindful seat. Oops. And so let's just find a comfortable posture. I'll just invite everyone to sit up straight. This is what we tell our kids to do, or when I was growing up, I was certainly always being told, sit up straight, sit up straight. It actually does make a difference in terms of our brains and our bodies. You can allow your eyes to close if that feels comfortable for you. Now let's begin by just bringing your attention, your awareness to your senses. Maybe at first, just aware of any sounds that you hear. Any smells in the air, any lingering tastes of coffee in your mouth. Noticing what you see in your field of vision, or maybe just on the backs of your eyelids. And then turning towards sensations in your body, starting at the edges of your body, just feet on the ground, back and legs against the chair. Noticing any other sensations in your body, deeper in. And taking a step away from sensations and just turning toward emotions. What emotions are present right now? Maybe it's boredom, maybe it's excitement. Maybe it's looking forward to summer, or maybe it's sadness or relief of the school year ending. A little bit of all of these, just noticing what emotions are present. Stepping away from emotions and turning toward A, which I have as standing for actions or impulses. What do you feel like doing right now? Adjusting your posture, or taking notes, or maybe running out of the room screaming, just noticing what impulses might be here. And then lastly, what are the thoughts, judgments? Find yourself thinking about your grocery list or the rest of the day. Just noticing what thoughts are here. And I'll just ring the bell once more. And you can bring your attention back outward into the room. Maybe just noticing for yourself if there's been anything of a shift from before and after. And certainly I notice I feel a little bit more settled before I have to do some public speaking, which I always find helpful. And it does seem like the room is a bit more focused. So the idea here is that we're getting into the present moment, and what this helps us do is feel just a bit more settled, help our kids in our classrooms or even at home feel a bit more settled and a bit more open and ready for learning. It was very cool doing this directly with the kids last night, because I actually end up in my work spending more time talking to adults about how to teach kids mindfulness than I do oftentimes actually working with kids directly. And it was a real treat just to hear them all kind of say, oh, things seem a little bit crisper. I feel like I just woke up from a really good nap. I feel really much more alert. Right? And this really does help us prepare our bodies, our brains for learning, for connecting, for all of that. So I just want to introduce myself a little bit more. I do a lot of different things now. So I write books, I teach at Harvard Medical School, I do probably about 50 or 60 things like this every year for parents or teachers or educators or therapists. I still work as a therapist a couple days a week, working with kids and adolescents and families, doing therapy and mental health work, doing a lot of consulting. And it's a path that I didn't expect to be on at all. And I keep reading all this literature about kids and the importance of them knowing, especially in communities like this one, that it's not always a straight shot. That it's not like, you go from honors or AP Psych your senior year, straight off to, some really clear job at an Ivy League school or something like that. There's a lot of zigzags in between. And so I grew up in a community not unlike where we are now, pretty high pressure, high school, extremely high achieving parents, lots of doctors, lawyers, finance people, things like that in the community. And I went off to a great college and was there for about 3 years, and then had basically a totally epic meltdown. And I was struggling with anxiety, I'm struggling with depression, I'm struggling really a lot with substances, and ended up taking a few years off, during which time my parents basically dragged me onto a mindfulness retreat. This was back in 1999. And it was completely transformative for me. Suddenly things started to make sense. I didn't feel quite so depressed. My anxiety went down. I got sober, which I've been now for over 18 years. So many things really transformed. I went back, I finished my degree. I was an English major and not a psych major, but I finished up my degree. I worked as a special ed teacher for a couple of years, and then I went back to school for clinical psych. And all during that time, I continued to practice mindfulness for myself and continued to just really think, I wish I'd had this when I was younger. I really wish I'd had this when I was younger. Is there a way I can start to bring this to younger people? And in graduate school, it was kind of an exciting time because mindfulness was really merging with psychology and clinical psychology. And so I had these opportunities to start doing more work around that. And my dissertation ended up being about teaching kids mindfulness. Was that even possible? And coming up with some ideas. And from there, I basically decided I was going to try to get that published as a book, and that's what ended up happening and got me on this path. But I think back about that moment 20 or so years ago when my parents took me on this mindfulness retreat, and what was cool about it was that it actually felt very familiar. And what I've realized since then is that mindfulness is something that's really innate in all of us. It's a natural human quality. What we're trying to do with ourselves and with kids is figure out how do we continue to water those seeds so that it grows, right? Not push that out, that wonder and that curiosity and that being in the moment, which the more pressure we put on kids and the more, frankly, I think time we all spend on these things, the less mindful we really are. And so I was thinking about other experiences from when I was a kid, and I remember things like my parents sent me off to this nature camp when I was young, and we would do things at this camp. They'd say, let's go into the woods and let's walk as quietly as possible. Can you walk in the woods without making any sound at all? And then many years later, I took a mindfulness course and they talked about mindful walking, and I realized it was very similar. It takes so much focus and concentration to try to walk completely silently. Or we'd sit down in the woods and they'd say, we're going to listen to all the sounds in the silence. And when you're 7 or 8 years old, you're thinking, we're not going to hear anything. And then starting to realize, oh, can you hear the trees whispering to each other? If you listen carefully enough, can you hear the leaves falling from the trees? And it really sharpened our focus and sharpened our attention. And it was actually this lovely memory that I have, or being with my dad, and I should remember this very vividly, just like laying on a raft in a pond and looking up at the sky and the clouds. He said, if you pick one cloud and you focus on it and you breathe, you can make the cloud disappear with your mind. And I felt like this incredible magic trick when I was 8 or 9, right? Of course, the cloud's going to disappear anyway. But again, it was this really sweet experience that I then connected back when I was ready, because my own life was falling apart, when I was ready to figure out where does mindfulness fit into my life. The seeds were already there from being a kid. And so that's a lot of the work that I'm interested in doing, is how do we start to plant these seeds in kids so that maybe they use this stuff now, right? Or maybe it's when they're 20, or maybe it's when they're 30 or something like that, but it's there and it's ready for them, that they have had a positive experience of something like this when they're kids, so that when they grow up and they maybe really do need it at some point, it's ready for them. So I wanted to just get a sense also of who's here. Who teaches elementary school? Works with really young kids, okay. Middle school, very brave, nice. High school, all right. And who's a classroom teacher? Okay. Therapists of any kind? Administrators? Okay. Who's feeling left out? Anybody? Music, wonderful, absolutely wonderful, great. So the challenge, of course, is giving everyone practices that feel relevant enough for you. But we'll just think about how do we adapt as we go. Who's got some familiarity with mindfulness already? Okay, pretty much everybody. So, yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about how do we start to teach kids mindfulness? And I always get asked, how do we create more mindful kids and more mindful schools and more mindful communities? And I realized the best way to create stressed out, miserable kids is to surround them with stressed out and miserable adults, which probably means that the best way to create more mindful and compassionate and present kids is to surround them with more mindful, compassionate, and present adults. And so, as Tim was saying at the beginning, right, it really starts with building a community, and that's when it starts to really trickle down to the kids that we work with. So it keeps coming back to us. I also saw this meme online, I think I showed this last year, but basically it says, never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down. And I don't know if anyone's tried this. Right? I've tried this when I was a teacher, I've tried this as a therapist, I've got a 4.5-year-old and a 1-year-old at home, I've certainly tried it with them. It's really surprisingly ineffective. Right? The best way we can help our kids to calm down is to create a space in which they feel safe enough that they can calm down. And how do we create that, right? Well, we try to work with families to help create spaces in the home. Just an emotional space, that the entire home is a place where kids feel safe enough to settle down. To create spaces in our schools, whether it's our offices or the whole building or the classrooms, where kids feel safe and comfortable enough that they can let their guard down a little bit, that they can put up their hand when they're not sure if they know the answer, that they can go to the guidance counselor's office and maybe open up a little bit more than they might otherwise. That all keeps coming back to us. Are we creating that space as the adults in which the kids feel safe enough to do the learning that they need to do the emotional and psychological development that we know that they need to do, and that's all really part of our job. Because when we're under stress, when we feel threatened, when we're not feeling safe, whether it's something from outside of school or something in school, something inside of us, it actually shuts down a kid's ability, or anyone's ability to learn, to think creatively, to do all the things that we want them to do and to make positive connections as well. So I just want to really keep coming back to this point over and over again, that it keeps starting with us. It starts at the bottom here with our own practice, and then we think about building a more mindful community of adults around the kids. And last night, working with the student leaders, right, so it's actually trickling down from them, hopefully, too. And then maybe it's thinking about teaching kids mindfulness or other skills that they're going to need in our classrooms, in our offices. And then maybe they're practicing independently, and then maybe they're living a bit more mindfully. But it keeps coming back to us, to whatever it is that we're doing to manage our stress, to keep ourselves clear and calm and focused. So what is really mindfulness? I mean, and to me, the quickest definition, I like to say mindfulness is paying attention to the here and now with kindness and curiosity. And it's got these 3 elements. And when we teach kids anything, we want to break it into smaller pieces. Right? So this first part being paying attention. And I'm sure all of us have been told to pay attention. Right? We've all probably told our kids to pay attention, which is usually about as effective as telling them to calm down also. Right? But so few of us have ever been taught how to pay attention or even think, maybe I should teach these kids how to pay attention because it might be hard for them because of their executive functions or their anxiety or depression, or there's just other stuff going on in their lives. So what we're doing with mindfulness is we're training our brains and helping kids actually develop their brains in a way that they're able to pay attention. It's really building that muscle of learning how to pay attention. And then it's about focusing on what? Well, it's focusing on the present moment, on the here and now. And this is really hard. It was actually kind of a fun conversation with the kids last night. They were talking about, I said, does junior year live up to the hype? And they said, yeah, it kind of does. I said, well, what is it that feels different? And they were saying that up until and through sophomore year, you're really just sort of focused on what's right in front of you. And then starting at the end of sophomore year and into junior year, it starts to be like, what's next? And that's good to be able to focus on what's next, but that fixation really starts to set in, which can be, again, it can be healthy, it can be unhealthy. And what we want is for it to be healthy and motivating, not to be unhealthy and just totally focused only on the future, missing out on the present, not enjoying life anymore, right? Overly worried about the college process and that kind of thing. And I remember when I was in high school, it really was, okay, I'm gonna fail this test and then fail the school, and I'm gonna die alone under a bridge, and no one's gonna come to my funeral. Like, I'd just be so future focused and anxious that it would keep me from just doing what was right in front of me. And so what we're trying to do is help ourselves and our kids be in the present when it's helpful to be in the present, and be focused on the future when that's able to motivate us and move us forward, but be able to switch between these different things. And again, that's through mindfulness that we can really do that. And being in the present also makes us happier, is what the research finds. That what we're doing is actually less important as how focused we are on doing it. If we're in the moment, we're far more likely to be enjoying it than if we're doing something and we're thinking about the past or the future or whatever else. So it's really is helpful to be in the present. The problem is our minds are usually wandering. About 50% of the time, so we're trying to train ourselves to be in the present, help kids get back to the present. And then learning also how to be a bit less judgmental, kinder to ourselves, curious about our experience, not judgmental of ourselves, right? The other bumper sticker that I like, it says, don't believe everything you think, right? I've seen some of that around, and it's true, we all have that critical voice that says, you're not good enough. And kids have this, especially, it really rears its ugly head into adolescence. It starts in around age 8 or 9, and then it kicks into high gear in adolescence and says, you're not a good enough student, you're not smart enough, you're not good looking enough, you don't have as many likes on Instagram, you don't get as good grades. It's this comparing mind, and when we compare ourselves to other people, that usually doesn't go so well. Almost all the time we compare ourselves negatively, we feel worse. And even if we feel like maybe I'm better at something than someone else, what that does is it separates us still. So it disconnects us, this comparison that we're always doing. So it's learning how to not believe everything we think, not believe that critical voice that we have inside of us. And sometimes that can motivate us, but after a certain point, it really stops motivating us. So it's learning how to build for ourselves just a more compassionate inner voice, as well as that more critical inner voice. So we're trying to do that as well and be a bit more accepting of our circumstances, which doesn't have to mean liking the situation. I don't have to like math class, right? But if I can be more accepting of the fact that I'm in math class right now, then maybe I can begin to do some work. But if I'm just stressed, I'm not feeling safe because I don't know the answer, right? I'm feeling anxious about it, I'm certainly not going to get any learning done. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do here. So paying attention to the here and now with kindness and curiosity, or acceptance and non-judgment. These are words that describe mindfulness. And sometimes also pictures can be useful for understanding mindfulness. Right, I think we probably noticed a few differences up here. The human being, of course, all this stuff on their mind. The dog seeing just the sunshine in the trees, the human being not even seeing the sunshine in the trees. And what starts to happen over time, the more stressed out we get, is that our minds, our brains actually rewire to be more stressed out. If I'm stressed today, I'll be stressed tomorrow. If I'm not in the moment today, I won't be in the moment tomorrow. But if I train my brain to see the sunshine in the trees and to enjoy it, then I've built actually a shortcut in my brain so that when it's Friday afternoon, or it's the first day of summer next week, right, can be really in the present moment and enjoy that present moment and not thinking, oh my gosh, there's only 72 more days until Labor Day, then I'm back in school again, right? Not that I'm counting, right? So it's learning how to build that shortcut. And really also see things as they are, right? I asked a group of teenagers, about the difference between these two, and this one kid said, I get it, it's not actually like mindfulness is all sunshine and rainbows, because the human being's thinking about all that stuff, right? They're about to step in the dog shit. And I actually thought that was like really insightful, because mindfulness is not pretending everything's great. It's not pretending it's sunny when it's not sunny. It's not pretending there's not dangers around. It's seeing things clearly, so that you know where to step and where not to step, and you can make a good choice. And that's really what mindfulness allows us to do. But the more stressed out we are, then usually what happens is we see things even worse. Our perspective gets even worse. This is called the negativity bias. It's wired into all of us as humans. We tend to see the negative a bit more than the positive. And the more stressed out we are, that negativity bias gets even stronger. And we get even more stressed out, and we get even grumpier. And I'll talk in a moment about how this works. But what we know about particularly our teenagers is that teenagers are actually now the most stressed out age group and demographic group in the country. And what this leads to is the epidemic rates that we see of anxiety. 1 in 3 adolescents now has an anxiety disorder. Epidemic rates of depression, which I was listening to a talk on the plane down about depression and anxiety. Depression is the #1 disability around the world for adults and for teenagers now, keeping kids from getting to school and doing the work and things that they need to do. And the stress is really just making all of this worse. And I've worked in a number of different districts, and I live in a pretty, as I said, the Boston area is pretty pressure cooker in terms of the schools, and kids are under so much pressure these days. And it's not just the 3 things up here. It's also things like college and sports, and worried about violence, and worried about the environment, and worried about so many other things on kids' minds. And they're trying to just get through school and get to college, or get through adolescence and grow up relatively unscathed. And I've got parents, meanwhile, who I had this kid I worked with a few years ago. His mom had his afternoon scheduled into 15-minute increments. And he was 16 years old, and she said, "Where do I fit in mindfulness?" I was like, forget mindfulness. Let him just go outside. All these things that some of us grew up doing that were fun, stress relievers, have become just items for the college resume, right? Sports is now, a lot of the families I work with in my private practice, like in 4th or 5th grade, the families are saying to the kids, you need to pick your sport now so you can do that all 4 seasons so that you can get recruited for college, right? Kids who are like 12 and 13 years old are getting surgeries that like 40-year-old athletes used to get from repetitive stress. I mean, it's absolutely crazy in terms of what's happening in some places. Even things like drama and music, which again used to be really fun, these have become competitions, right? I had a kid who was saying his drama team was going to the state championship, and I was like, okay, that's cool, like that you made it that far, but like, isn't this really just about having fun? And so I think that's really a shame. It just puts kids under so much stress. And what stress also really starts to do is it shuts down our ability to work, our ability to think, our ability to connect. The exercise I usually do, I might have done this with folks last year, but just holding your hands up like this and just making really tight fists and noticing now how your body feels and your breath and your mind. And then you can just let go and notice how good it feels to let go. And then just kind of collapse over in your seat like this. And again, noticing your body and your breath and your mind. And then you can just sit up straight, or in the middle, palms up like this. And noticing how your mind feels, your body, your breath. And you can just put both hands over your heart for a moment. Just noticing what this is like. And you can just put your hands back down again. And these are a few different ways that we can respond to stress. These are actually wired into us to respond to stress. Like thousands of years ago, we're getting chased by tigers or something like that. And what do you want to do? If you're being chased by a tiger, you probably want to run away. You have the flight response. That's really useful if you're being chased by a tiger. Or maybe you have the fight response. You try to fight it off, right? Or maybe you just freeze and become camouflaged. Or maybe what you do is you just say, forget it, and you kind of play dead and wait for the worst of the attack to be over. These are really useful if you're being chased by a tiger. But this is the same way we respond to stresses like, being chased by a deadline or by tryouts for the hockey team or by who knows what else. And kids and we adults go into fight, and we go into flight, and we go into freeze, and we go into forget it. And the creative adolescents have another F word they put in there besides forget it, by the way, which I'm sure you can think of yourself. And what happens over time, right? That fight response wires into being nasty and grumpy and irritable or even getting into fights. In the flight response, the more we avoid things, actually the talk I was listening to is Lynn Lyons, who's a wonderful presenter on anxiety, and she talks about this. The more we let kids avoid things that make them anxious, that anxiety just gets bigger and bigger. So the flight, the avoidance, increases anxiety, leads to more anxiety disorders and panic attacks. The freeze response in nature become camouflaged. That's kind of like a post-traumatic stress response. And the forget it response, that's not kids that are acting out, but they're sitting in the back row, they're not doing the work, they're trying to slide between the cracks, they're getting depressed, they're getting isolated, all of that. And this is where they start to end up in my office as the therapist, right? And what else is happening is this turns on different parts of our brain and turns off other parts of our brain. It turns on the amygdala, the limbic system, which is the alarm in the brain. And of course, you can't focus when you have an alarm going off. And very literally, as the blood flows into this alarm system in the brain, it's flowing out from the parts of the brain, like back here behind your forehead, the prefrontal cortex, where you think things through and you manage your impulses. And you have your executive functions, which is what we hear all the time about is executive functions, kids having executive function deficits. That totally shuts down. The insular cortex over here, which is where we do we have our social intelligence, our emotional intelligence, see other people's perspective, have empathy and compassion, that also shuts down. So our brains are really not working at their best when we're under all of this stress, whether it's fight or flight, or whether it's freeze and forget it. And of course the body gets all dysregulated, our breath, it's hard to breathe when you're like this, right? Things like that. Our muscles clench up, our digestive system shuts down, our immune system shuts down, stops working altogether, in fact. That's why we get sick more often. That's why we get stomach issues when we're under stress. So that's the bad news. The good news, though, is that we have actually evolved. We have other ways we can respond to stress. We have what we might call the attend and befriend responses, or I might actually call these mindfulness and compassion or self-compassion. And they really do the opposite. They shut off the fight or flight. They shut off that alarm system. They activate the prefrontal cortex where we think things through and we manage our impulses. They activate the insular cortex where we do our social reasoning, where we have our relationships and connections that we make with other people. And sometimes when I talk to kids about this, right, they're not necessarily that interested in their prefrontal cortex, but they care a lot about that social aspect of their brain. Oh, this can help me feel more confident. This can help me feel a little bit better in social situations. So that can be a buy-in there too. We start to see things more clearly. We see the beautiful sunshine in the trees, and we see the dog shit, and we know what to avoid, and we know what to go toward. Our brains are just working that much better, and our bodies work better too. breath becomes regular and regulated and even, and the digestive system is working, the immune system is working, things like that all start coming back again, because our bodies don't feel like they're under threat and have to just figure out how to fight or freeze or flee or deal with that dangerous situation. So that's the stress response and a real quick lesson, and how it leads to more mental health issues. Again, whether this is us getting stressed out or whether it's the kids. And the other reality, and I previewed this at the beginning, but it's so important we start with ourselves because all of this stuff is contagious. Everyone knows when the week when college letters go out because everyone in the building is stressed out. The kids are stressed, the parents are stressed, the staff is all stressed, the teachers are stressed. Right? Everyone knows when it's finals time, right? Everyone's stress goes up, everyone's immune system stops working and starts getting sick. Right? Stress is really contagious. Anxiety is really contagious. Depression is really contagious. This has been shown over and over again. It's really interesting. But the good news is that mindfulness is contagious. Compassion is contagious. Self-compassion is contagious. And so how do we start to reverse the cycle of stress and move it toward mindfulness and being a lot better regulated? Here's like the horror show slide about how many college kids are in trouble these days. I'm actually working on a book about college mental health, so that's some of where this comes from. But again, when we're preparing our kids only academically and not emotionally, then they're going off to college and they're dropping out at record rates and they're struggling with mental health issues at record rates and that kind of thing. So I just want to share a few ways that we can help regulate ourselves again. And I heard someone say that your breath can actually be like a remote control to shut off that alarm, to shut off the amygdala in the limbic system in the brain, and to turn on the prefrontal cortex where we have our executive functions, and turn on the insular cortex where we have a lot of our social functions. And I really love that metaphor of the remote control. It's really simple. We can turn things up, we can turn things back down, we can turn up our attention a little bit. We can turn down the fear response a little bit. We can turn on feelings of safety, safe enough to calm down, safe enough to do the learning that we want our kids to do and for us to do as well. So Kelly McGonigal is a researcher who found actually that when we slow our breath way down to between like 4 and 6 breaths in a minute, that's what really helps us focus. That's what turns on the brain for learning, it's what turns on the brain for socializing, and it's what shuts off the alarm in the brain. So again, this is something I really wish I'd had when I was younger. So when I walked into the SATs and I sat there and my mind went totally blank, right? Because I was getting overly anxious. If I'd known how to shut that alarm off just with some breathing practices, right? I might have felt a little bit more confident. Or walking into that party, freshman year in college, and being able to shut off the alarm response with my breath rather than with like way too many beers, right? That might have led to a different path as well in some ways. And so all of these things, we regulate our breath, that regulates our body, which regulates our brain, which regulates our attention, regulates our impulses, and regulates our emotions. So our breath is really powerful, but I'll teach you things besides just breathing, because I had a kid say to me once, oh, breathing is played out. I was like, okay, I think I say this besides breathing for mindfulness. But I'll share a few for younger kids, and then talk about this for older kids as well. So some of these do come out of the book. But A, for example, is for the alligator breath, which I think you saw me start to demonstrate. And with real little kids, and again, I've got a 4-year-old at home, and he'll do this. He's been doing this since he was 3. It's just simply breathing in, and breathing back out. Breathing in, and breathing back out. So we're bringing in some of the movement, making it fun, easy to focus on. And we can imagine that. And these practices grow with kids. So yeah, when he's 3 or 4, he can do the alligator jaws and all of that. But as he gets older, right? He doesn't have to do the movements, he can just imagine what it's like to slow his breath down. The other thing about the alligator breath, with my son, I took him to a conference a couple of years ago, and I think I might have shared this with you guys last time. I decided I was going to have him get up on stage and teach alligator breaths to everybody, and so he got up there and just went like this. Thanks a lot, son. Might make you look the great mindful dad, right? B is for the butterfly breath. You can just hold your hands up like this. And just breathing in. And then breathing back out. And breathing in. And breathing back out. So again, just using some gentle movements. This also helps us to sit up straight, which again affects what's happening in terms of the hormones in our body and our ability to focus. It really opens up the chest. I had a yoga teacher come up to me and say, oh, this is a great chest opening exercise. You get more oxygen. Like, that's so great that you put that in there. I was like, I didn't even think of that, but that's great. But it is kind of amazing to start to learn some of these things also about what breathing does and what some of these movements can also do. And again, can be fun for those younger kids. C is my favorite, the hot chocolate breath. And again, you can just hold your hands up like this. You've got a cup or a bowl of hot chocolate. If it's really full, if it's really hot, to be able to drink it, you just have to cool it off with your breath. So just gently blowing out, cooling off, and then breathing in, smelling. Breathing out, cooling off. Breathe in, smelling. Breathe out, cooling off. Breathe in, smelling. So it's just another really simple, we all know what it's like to breathe in, smelling, we all know what it's like to blow out, cooling something off, right? Gentle and steady. And that's what starts to calm the nervous system down. There's this new theory of the nervous system about the vagus nerve, which actually is what really helps us settle down. When we extend the exhale out longer, that's what starts to calm our bodies down, which calms our brains down, which opens up, again, for regulating our attention and focus, regulating our emotions, regulating our impulses. So some of these simple breathing practices can really help. And again, right when the kids are young, they're holding up their hands like this, they're imagining the hot chocolate. They get older, the hands fall away, they can still just imagine it. They get older, yeah, they can just know what it's like to breathe in and breathe out in a slow and regulated way. And we can also do this with them in a way that can be really helpful for them. Other people, right, as kids get older, they're not so interested in Dr. Willard's butterfly breaths, but maybe, into middle school, right, they get interested in the fact that maybe people they look up to, so many professional athletes, for example, these days, are using mindfulness for what they call mental fitness training. So many athletes, right, you can be incredibly strong, incredibly agile, really good team player, sink 50 baskets in a row during practice. But when you get to the championship level in that game, can you regulate your anxiety and your stress when the crowd is there to be able to really focus and be at your best? And that's where this mental fitness training really starts to come in. So just a practice like this, the 7-11 breath, which really helps us regulate and settle our breath down. And we can do this together. You can just start breathing in, counting to 7. So just breathing in, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and back out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And breathing in, counting up to 7. And back out, counting out to 11. up to 7. Back out to 11. And up to 7. Back out to 11. And then just letting your breath reset itself, just finding again that slower rate. And that's what calms the body, opens up the brain to be able to learn a little bit more effectively. Other simple breathing practices, even just sighing, can be a helpful way to extend the exhale out. A sigh is something we do unconsciously that actually regulates our breath. Right? We let out a sigh like, that's extending that exhale out, which again allows us to slow and regulate the breath and regulate that vagus nerve. And if, so there's some middle school teachers here, right? You probably have that experience, right, where the kids sigh at you, right? They're like, so lame, right? So I'll teach kids around that age sometimes, like, you can do like a stealth sigh, a silent sigh, you don't get in trouble, right? You just want to do it as silently as possible. And this actually helps settle down your nervous system, open up your brain, get out some of that frustration. Your teacher, your parents, they're so annoying, right? You won't get in trouble. It's kind of passive aggressive. You won't get in trouble if you do a silent sigh at them. Or maybe there's times you want to do a silent sigh at your whole classroom, right? And then you don't want to get in trouble with the superintendent over here, right? So we can just maybe let's all let out a big loud sigh together on the count of 3. So 1, 2, 3. And then we can do it again and just letting out a nice long silent sigh. So breathing in, and a long, totally silent sigh, pressing out all the air, just silently, slowly, all of the air out to the bottom of your breath. And then you can just allow your breath to reset itself again. So again, maybe in the difficult moments in your day, maybe at transition time, as the kids are coming back in, just allow everyone to let out a big loud sigh and then a silent sigh. Or to do a couple 7-11 breaths. Again, it's been fun watching, my son goes to this cooperative preschool, so I go in and I've been teaching them some breathing stuff. And they've really taken to it, and the teachers have too. It's actually really cool to see. And I don't know whether it's just because I was parent helper and they're like, we better impress, Chris because he's a mindfulness guy. But they were integrating this in throughout the day. Right? The kids were transitioning back in. They got to the top of the stairs. They were a little bit rowdy. Okay, guys, we're going to do 3 ninja breaths to settle ourselves down. A ninja breath is quietly breathing as quietly as possible. So we'll do 3 ninja breaths at the top of the stairs, and we'll transition the rest of the way into the classroom. Okay, let's go. Breathe in, totally silently. Breathing back out, totally silently. And a few of those, right, which again, it takes so much focus to be trying to breathe in absolute silence, right? And again, right, really helps the kids settle down, but also gets them out of whatever distracting thoughts are going on because it takes so much focus to try to really settle your breath down and do it as silently as possible. So it also really keeps, as I've been mentioning, it keeps coming back to our own practice. Our practice is the foundation of the kids' practice. They're not going to learn very well from a stressed out, anxious teacher, right? As a public speaker, everyone here is a teacher does public speaking, right? I know this as a public speaker. I used to be terrified of public speaking. Now I do it all the time. The more anxious I am, right, the more anxious the audience gets on my behalf, and it really doesn't work. Right? If I'm calm, if I'm having fun, then presumably the audience is having at least a little bit of fun. Right? So it's really important. All of this is this back and forth. We teach through our embodied presence, right? We want to be able to be calm, settled, clear, confident, and mindful as we're doing our lessons. That helps the kids, again, feel safe, helps their brains open up to absorb whatever it is that we're giving them. And that keeps going back and forth. It's this interplay between the teachers and the students, and it certainly happens as a therapist, between the therapist and the client, that these emotions are going back and forth, and the learning happens when we're all really settled and open in some way. So we teach through our body presence, not through like, okay, 7, 11 breath, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, right? It's like, no, we want to, right, teach in a way that really embodies the practice, because this stuff really is contagious and goes back to the kids. It really helps us not get so burned out in our work too. Connects us with what inspires us in this work, why we went into this work, which is really hard. It's really hard to be a teacher. That's why I quit. I couldn't hack it. I taught for 1.5 years, and it was way too hard for me. I became a therapist. I was like, I like their job. They're like the good cop. I want to do that. Teaching is unbelievably hard. So finding and making a time for your own practice, right? And again, you don't have to go and get a meditation cushion and sit down for hours on end, but finding moments in the day to just focus on your breath, feel your feet, notice sounds, eat a bit more mindfully, and focusing also on the positive. It's so easy in schools to, during staff meetings, during teacher meetings and stuff like that, which no one enjoys, no offense, I'm sure we'd all agree, right? It's so easy to end up focused on the negative. It's like, this kid is screwing up in this way, this kid hasn't done his homework, this kid this. Instead of focusing on the positive a bit more. And it's not like we're pretending, again, it's not like it's all sunshine and rainbows with mindfulness, right? We're focused on the negative and the positive, but we end up forgetting that we can focus a bit more on the positive. So taking some time in meetings to just really go around and talk about what's one thing that's going well in everyone's classroom. What's a kid that's succeeding this week? Who's a kid that didn't get their homework in all year and got it in? Who's a kid that you had to kick out of class almost every week who's been sitting in class because it hasn't been coming to school, who made it for an hour? So it's looking at not just the negative, but let's take time to focus on what's actually going well, because otherwise what happens is we get even more burned out. The more burned out we get, the more negative everything looks, and we get into that cycle more and more. So taking some time at the end of your day when you're driving home, just ask yourself, really, like, what went well today? What went well this week? What went well this year? This is really important to do, to break that negativity bias that we all end up with, which means that we end up just focused on the negative even more. And of course, who wants to go to a job that's all negative all the time? That's how we get more burned out. So taking time out to see what's going well. And what that also really does, as we start to shift our focus onto, again, not at the expense of looking at the negative, but bring in a bit more positive, is we start to see more opportunities. We actually become more creative. We see things that we'd otherwise miss. And the research really bears this out, that when we become more optimistic, we actually see new opportunities. We see things that we didn't see before. We see a new way of teaching this kid who just can't get it with that math problem. Well, what if I back up and I try this approach? We're actually able to do that. And becoming more compassionate as well toward our kids. I'm sure some people know the work of like Dan Siegel and Tina Bryson. They've written a number of great books about child development. I was teaching with Tina last fall, and she was talking about this study of teachers in the school where there's a lot of disciplinary problems with the kids. And I think what happened was the principals and the vice principals and superintendents were getting sick of the kids getting sent to their offices. They brought some people in to do some trainings of the teachers. And basically the skill that they taught the teachers that made the biggest difference was they said, okay, before you send the kid off for the disciplinary referral, I want you to think of 3 reasons why the kid might have acted this way. Basically just trying to give them more perspective and empathy on the kids who are acting out. And that actually just drastically lowered the number of disciplinary referrals. Maybe the teachers didn't want to do the paperwork, I don't know, right? Which may be part of it too. But really, just having to think, okay, maybe this kid didn't eat breakfast, right? Maybe, oh, that's right, the parents are having like going through a divorce right now, right? And I know he's having a difficult time socially. Maybe that's why he's acting out. And that allowed the teachers to then access, right? Maybe this is a different way I can manage this behavior issue than just another referral, go to the principal's office, go to the principal's office, right? So these kinds of things really start to change our perspective. They start to allow us to take more perspective on the kids, which allows us to help them and be better teachers, to reach more of those kids who are struggling because of their learning issues, because of their behavioral issues, because of whatever else might be going on in their lives. And mindfulness can do this, and appreciation and gratitude practices can do this. They really do help us, and they keep us also from getting burned out. It feels terrible to do the same thing over and over again. It doesn't feel good to send the kid to the principal's office every day, right? We want them to, the best thing is we want them in our class learning, right? Not in our class acting out, and not in the principal's office either. So these kinds of things really help us. And then we can think creatively also about how do we adapt mindfulness for different kinds of kids. Well, we played a bit with using the breath. Right? We can use our senses as an anchor. We did that in that opening mindful seat practice. If I clap my hands, we're all present for the sound of that hand clap. And our mind wanders off again. But that's where feeling our feet on the ground. This is one I like a lot. When my mind is racing, I'm trying to sit down and focus. My feet warm or cool? Is the ground hard or soft? My shoes tight or loose? Right? It really helps me settle into the present moment through my senses, or just noticing sounds. It's the farthest away sound I can hear. It's the closest sound I can hear. It's a sound from the left or from the right. In front of me, from behind me. Our senses keep bringing us into the present moment. So we can use these as short ways of helping the kids or ourselves just ground and be a bit more focused. We can use the imagination, get playful as a way of getting into the moment, practicing mindfulness. My favorite study about getting kids to be still, and there's a study about this. So much of psychology is quantifying what's obvious to any good teacher or any good parent. This researcher many years ago was trying to get 8-year-olds to stand still, and so he got out a stopwatch and he said, I want everyone to stand still, and of course 5 minutes later they're running around everywhere, and he brought them back in and he said, okay, I want you to stand still as long as you can, but this time I want you to imagine that you're a knight guarding a castle. Right? And just by doing this, what do you think happens? Right? The kids can now stand still for like 15 or 20 minutes. So by making it play acting, by making it a game, by making it a competition, by tapping into their imagination, kids are still activating their prefrontal cortex and shutting down the limbic system, but instead of focusing on their breath, they're focusing on imagining themselves in this cool role as being the knight guarding the castle. And it helps them to stand still. So we bring this into play acting, we bring it into games. I always feel like games are a wonderful opportunity to teach kids so many things, especially executive function skills, not just mindfulness. But I grew up, and I remember growing up in the 80s, and we play things like Simon Says, or Mother May I, or Red Light, Green Light, or 20 Questions, or Freeze Tag, all these kinds of games that we grew up playing when the teacher had an extra 5 minutes. And what happens now, unfortunately, there's pressure to do, let's just do some more prep for the test. Or let's do some other kind of game, or so many games are on these things these days. And all those games, Simon Says, Mother May, those were teaching things like careful listening skills. They were practicing impulse control. They were practicing transitioning between different zones of regulation. They were practicing social interactions of, can I read the teacher's facial expression? Are they going to say Simon Says, or are they not going to say it? Right? All these kinds of games are teaching these really critical skills. And then these days, kids are growing up and they're getting to high school, I'm like, why don't they have any impulse control skills? Why can't they, read facial expressions as well and social cues as well as they used to? Well, actually, it's because we haven't been giving them practice when they were younger. Why can't they transition? We're not helping them transition. We're not asking them to. We're not asking them to practice those things. So many of these games that we used to play are actually really teaching those skills. And a friend and I, we just got it rejected, unfortunately, but we were trying to write a book that was basically just called 50 Things to Do Besides Hand Your Kid a Screen. And it was basically just like all these games we grew up playing, which are so important for a child's development, which are so important for executive function skill development. So I beg parents and I beg teachers to, when you've got time, play Simon Says, play Mother May I, play Freeze Dance, play all these games that really do actually teach kids these really critical skills and give them a chance to practice these really important skills, because they're not getting them from their devices and the other things that they're doing in the rest of their time. Or learning how to delay gratification. Like when I was growing up, right, I'd have to, if I finished dinner like at 5:45, and Mr. Rogers came on at 6, I'd have to entertain myself for those 15 minutes. And now my son, we finish dinner and we can just press play on the computer and he can just be watching Daniel Tiger right away. There's no need for that, to fill that gap, to manage that boredom. And that's why so many of us and so many young people can't manage boredom, because we've never been taught how to or had to practice doing that. So I think games are really important, and we can bring mindfulness also into games in kind of silly ways. One thing I do with kids in my practice, this is good for younger kids, I play Jenga, for example, and on a bunch of the Jenga blocks, if you pull one out, it says something like, name 3 sounds you can hear. Or you pull one out and it says, right, notice 3 sensations in your feet, or do 2 hot chocolate breaths, or something like that. So it's integrated into the game that we're playing with the kids. Or Candyland, which I'm pretty convinced is a game that's been designed to torture adults with boredom. We were at the toy store, my son and I were at the toy store a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, what's this game? And I was like, no, we're not getting Candyland. But a friend and I adapted it to be like emotional intelligence Candyland. Right? Land on blue and talk about sadness. Land on red, talk about a way to manage anger, a time you were angry. Right? And then landing on some other colors, right? Land on purple, right? Notice one sound that you can hear. Land on orange, right? Maybe take a mindful breath, right? So we can start to weave some of this stuff into things maybe that we're already doing. We can bring, again, that playfulness to things like walking. Right? Walk mindfully, like walk as silently as you can. Walk like a ninja. I'm also about to write a book about ninja training for kids to get some of the like tween age boy mindfulness, right? But walk as quietly as you can, or walk like you're walking over thin ice. Or like let's balance pennies or action figures on our shoes and try to walk. It takes so much focus and concentration to be able to do that. So there are different ways we can bring mindfulness into the other things that we're doing, into music. I was suggesting last night, and this is something I do myself too, just listening to my favorite song, and that's 4 or 5 minutes. If I listen to that mindfully, that's 4 or 5 minutes of real focused practice. That's probably more interesting than focusing on my breath. I'm going to listen to my favorite song and just listen to one instrument. Can I follow the bass line for the whole song without my mind wandering to one of the other instruments? That's really training my brain for that 4 or 5 minutes. And I'll probably notice something new about that song I hadn't noticed before. Right? Or listen to an angry song or a sad song or an anxious song. And that's a good way to also notice what anxiety or anger or sadness feel like in my body. Because music is so evocative emotionally that it can be really a powerful way to help kids recognize what's happening in their bodies in terms of their emotional experience. A lot of younger kids struggle to recognize what's going on in their emotions. So using music can be really helpful with that. And I even noticed that when I'm driving. If I'm listening to an angry song, my driving gets a lot more aggressive, right? I listen to a calm song, okay, I'm a little bit calmer as I drive. Movie soundtracks are really good for angry music or for anxious music or something like that to provoke those emotions. Bringing it into things like sports and athletics. Again, so many folks in the professional athletes world practicing mindfulness these days. All kinds of evidence on how mindfulness can really change your brain through this idea of what's called neuroplasticity, which is that our brains really do work like a muscle. We can actually build up gray matter and new connections in parts of our brain when we practice mindfulness, making ourselves smarter, making ourselves better at focusing, making ourselves more compassionate, really impacting those parts of the brain, and all kinds of research on where this helps us with concentration and mental health, anxiety, stress, so many other things. Just thousands and thousands of studies coming out all the time. So many people practicing mindfulness these days who maybe we look up to or our kids look up to. And a lot of these, again, I think you'll get the most out of this the more you practice, just like the more you go to the gym, the stronger you'll get. But we have these little moments in the day, right, where we can just pause and notice sounds, or feel our feet, or regulate our breath, or tune into sensations, emotions, actions, and thoughts. So many little moments that we might have, or that our kids might have. Maybe it's backstage before a performance, or in the locker room, or the sidelines before they go out into the field hockey game. Right? We have these little moments in our days where we can do even just a short practice that can impact the rest of our day. So why mindfulness for us and our kids? I think it's really empowering for everybody as we ask our kids to regulate their impulses and their emotions and pay attention. Right? This is actually teaching them how, it's teaching us how at the same time. It's simple and portable, can take this with us everywhere they go. I love that I've worked with kids now for 10, 15 years, some kids I've worked with in my practice. And I've watched them go from hot chocolate breaths to having a more significant practice. And I've also watched them go from having hot chocolate breaths to not really using this stuff, but knowing that at some point they may be able to go back to it when they do really need it. And that's really powerful. There's all kinds of evidence. It really does build resilience across the lifespan for kids. And I sometimes think about mindfulness is like single tasking rather than multitasking. This is just doing one thing at a time. And that can even just bring more mindfulness into our days, to just do one thing at a time. I have a friend who does a day of mindfulness. He just calls it do one thing at a time day, which I think is kind of brilliant. It's hard to do. It's really hard to do, to try to have a do one thing at a time day. I encourage you to try it at some point over summer vacation. Or just ask yourself every so often, what am I doing and how do I know I'm doing it? How do I know I'm speaking? How do I know I'm walking? How do I know I'm eating? How do I know I'm breathing? This helps us just slow down, become a little bit more aware. So we can just slow down and really try to do one thing at a time. And again, especially as teachers, as educators, I know how busy we all are. We do have these little moments in the day. And I can send you guys these slides too, or Tim can send you the slides if you're interested. Actually, they're on my website. If you just fill out a form on my website, they get sent to you automatically. But it is just finding these little moments in the day where we can just slow down and do one thing at a time. So I'll just end with this last meme that's one of my favorites that I saw online. It says, there's this guy at the coffee shop sitting at a table, not on his phone, not on a laptop, just drinking his coffee like a psychopath. And it's so true. It's so rare that we're really just doing one thing at a time. So I know it is almost summer, and that gives you an opportunity to have a little bit more time when you're drinking your coffee in the morning. Just drink your coffee. But even when the school year comes back, right, in September or in August, because that's when I was here last year, so you guys start early, right, to just slow down, right? Close the laptop, put your phone away, put the grade book down. Just take those first few sips of your coffee a bit more mindfully, and see if your day doesn't go a bit differently. See if the quality of your interactions with the kids, with your colleagues, right? And when you get home with your spouse, with your family, if they don't go a little bit differently as well, because that's really what mindfulness allows us to do. It helps us regulate ourselves. And what we're really doing as adults who work with kids, when we learn how to regulate ourselves, this is actually teaching kids how to regulate themselves, how to regulate their emotions, how to regulate their impulses. It really is a two-way street. This stuff really is contagious, right? Just as the kid's stress is contagious, just as the parent's stress is contagious to us and spills over, right? So too can our centeredness, can our compassion, can our mindfulness be contagious and spread back to the kids and back to the parents and back throughout the community, so that the kids really can grow up being that much more resilient going forward, that much more effective growing up, right? That much happier and all of that. But it keeps starting with us. So thank you all very much for, again, being here on a beautiful Saturday morning, right at the end of the school year. I really appreciate it. So I'll be around if folks have any questions or comments or complaints. But again, thank you so much for having me.
So thank you all for coming. We have some books out that Chris will go out and sign if you want to purchase the alphabet book or the Growing Up Mindful, $10 a piece. And Chris will stay around. And if you know any parents who you think need to come and want to talk, call them on the phone right now and say, oh, maybe you should.
They call you on the weekends, right?
Yes. Follow Chris on Twitter at Dr. Chris Willard. He always has really interesting things. So thank you all for coming, and have a great weekend.
And a wonderful summer, too. Not that you're counting the days.